Good morning and welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Victoria Moody. I'm Research Strategy Lead at Jisc. I'm also co-investigator and Deputy Director of the UK Data Service, which brings together some of the most robust and complex survey data produced by research institutions, governments and NGOs internationally and in the UK. Trusted research environments are a significant part of my focus, and I'm a passionate advocate for their societal and economic impact. I'd also like to introduce Caitlin Bloom, Jisc's Enterprise Research Manager. I want to thank you all very much for giving up your time this morning and joining us on what will be, I hope, a very interesting panel discussion regarding trusted research. Just a quick few points to mention in terms of housekeeping. Please keep your microphone on mute throughout the discussion. We welcome your questions for the panel, so please post questions in the chat pane at the bottom of the screen. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the topics discussed today, so feel free to add these to the chat pane too. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. We are delighted to be joined by Dr. Andy Walsh, Praxis Oral Board Member, Director, Academic Liaison GSK, Jennifer Stergio, Director of Research and Innovation Services at Northumbria University and the Chair of ARMA, James Draycott, Head of Information and Communication Technologies, Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, UK Research and Innovation, and Alex Chacks, Head of Commercialisation for UK Research and Innovation. By way of a quick introduction to Jisc, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are the UK Further Education and Skills, Higher Education and Research Sector's not-for-profit organisation for digital services and solutions. We work with a range of public sector organisations and commercial providers. Our guiding vision is technology for good. We are a major provider of research infrastructure and services and a partner in and authority on the use of network, cybersecurity, cloud, data, licensing, content and discovery to support research and innovation. Our research and innovation sector support is rooted in our position as the UK's national research and education network, providing infrastructure and facilities, including the Janet network. We are proud to be a trusted partner of UK research and innovation. With the launch last week of our research and innovation strategy for 2021 to 23, we have consulted widely in its development. We know that the demands on and priorities of the UK research and innovation sector are evolving at pace. We also see a need for increased use of virtual research environments, which brings challenges for managing data, both personal data and commercially sensitive data, and also intellectual property, mitigating risks for multi-partner research projects. Our strategy focuses on the need to prioritise integrity and transparency, whilst accelerating routes to application. Our engagement in the development of the strategy has led us to focus on 7 strategic themes, and I'd like to just quickly highlight 3 of them of particular relevance for trusted research environments. Supporting the new national data infrastructure for research. Underpinned by the Janet network, our cloud, cybersecurity and national access and authorisation infrastructure, we will support the coordination of a flexible set of services for institutions and multi-partner research consortia, offering on-demand, trusted technical components for active research. Recording the UK's research estate in support of a UK-wide research capability. The ability to identify, deploy, share and reuse physical and intangible assets that comprise the research estate, such as equipment and kit, but also software and content, IP and instruments, algorithms and code, are central to delivering efficiencies, supporting the civic agenda, government strategies focused on place, open research, and of course achieving net zero. We are exploring expanding the well-established digital approaches to the management and use of these assets. Applied research and knowledge exchange, supporting its commercialisation and deployment. As the UK commits further to removing barriers to innovation, the breadth of academic and industry collaborations and commercial spin-outs from academic research is set to grow. We will explore how infrastructure can follow the researcher, continuing to work with the host of all publicly funded research resources. Investigating use cases for shared infrastructure with fellow representative bodies focused on knowledge exchange, and partnering with higher education institutions the funding bodies of the UK and local enterprise partnerships to use our national infrastructure in furthering the levelling up agenda. Excuse me. We know the importance of trusted research environments to our HE members and our colleagues in industry, which is why we wanted to facilitate this conversation today. I'll now hand over to Caitlin. Thank you.
Hello and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. I'm really excited because I think this is going to be a really interesting and insightful discussion. So my first challenge this morning is defining the scope of what we're going to be talking about today. Now, trusted research is an absolutely massive area and a topic that many of us are going to have different interpretations of. So for the purposes of today, and please, this isn't the exclusive definition. So we're going to be talking about research that requires data and information to be shared through multi-party agreements for a single outcome. So the kind of parameters that we're going to frame that around are knowledge exchange good practice, data security, facilitating knowledge exchange and collaboration, multi-party agreements, institutional infrastructure, and research going forwards. So please do kind of ask your questions within those parameters. If it's a totally off the wall question, we will do our best, but those are the kind of sort of topics that we're going to be looking at. So just before we dive in, this topic is really important and is of increasing importance as the whole research ecosystem, so academic research, industry partners, funders, and anybody else involved in research, is looking more at the importance of collaboration and safe and secure seamless working. There is nothing more frustrating than clicking on a link and it not working. It just slows us all down. So there are various ways that we can support researchers to do what they do best and allow administrators to have things in nice, neat places so they can get to them when they need them. Research is becoming more and more complicated. We all know this, the pandemic's changed the way we work, probably forever. And we want to make sure that data is secure and stored in an appropriate place. And most importantly, that commercial data is protected. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to the panel to introduce themselves and give their perspectives on trusted research. This is an opportunity for you guys as delegates to hear a little bit more from the individuals. So I would like to hand over to Jennifer first, please.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Stergio, Director of Research and Innovation at Northumbria University and Chair of the Association for Research Managers and Administrators, that's ARMA. So for me, trusted research is a really important issue, but it's more than data security and storage. It needs to start a long way before we're having conversations about data security and storage, right at the beginning, before researchers are applying for funding, when early stage relationships and partnerships are first being developed. If I was to ask you how much you really know about your partners, I'd be interested to hear some of your answers. But how can we, how can individual researchers, institutions, and the UK research sector as a whole act with confidence in our partnerships whilst mitigating risk in a proportionate way? We don't want to just kind of go out there and work with everyone with no due diligence, no oversight, every project, and not understand the risks that we're potentially exposed to. But at the same time, we don't want to freeze because of fear of that risk and not pursue important agendas and some of the bleeding edge research topics that might bring higher security risks, but actually are the very topics and subjects that we need to drive our economy forward and indeed to recover from the pandemic to build back better. So this is why ARMA have been leading a project about due diligence in international research to enable better sharing of information regarding partners, to make due diligence easier and more accessible, and to give more robust information to support people in going into those partnerships, researchers and institutions, so that we're laying the groundwork effectively in those partnerships. By the time we by the time we're actually generating data, and I mean, hopefully we'll be thinking about data security and storage right up front, but by the time we're generating data, we should actually have really understood who we're working with, how they work, what kind of pressures they might come under, and how we might need to be able to respond to those things to make sure that our research is secure. And that's all from me for now. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. Can I please go to James next?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. I'm James Draycott, Head of Information and Communication Technologies at EPSRC, part of UKRI. Ditto to everything Jennifer just said, stole a lot of what I was going to say, really. So from my own perspective, I have two roles in the way I think about trusted research. First of all is my day job of looking after the Information and Communication Technologies portfolio. Everything we fund, which is a digital technology, is by its very nature dual use if you try hard enough. And therefore, how we look at the funding we give out, the technologies we has with partners is incredibly important as to how we write strategy to make sure that we are doing the most benefit for the UK. The other piece of work that I'm engaged with is I am leading some work across the whole of UKRI to look at how we think about risk around trusted research. We are very much coming at this from a perspective of enabling. And I think that's the key thing for trusted research for me, in that this is about how do we enable people to have partnerships and to work to the best of their abilities. Without a framework of trust between partners, collaboration is nigh on impossible. And ensuring we have rigorous frameworks that allow that trust to happen is the only way we can continue to collaborate in the international fashion that benefits the UK. From a safeguarding perspective, we come at it from this is publicly funded research. Everything that we fund should be for the overall good of the UK. And that's in terms of making sure the tech development that we see from it is for the benefit of the UK, be it in this country or in collaboration with others, avoiding illegal activities certainly, but also through to the unethical use of technologies and how they might be deployed. I think the key takeaway I'd like everyone to take from this, and I'll get it in early, is that actually this concerns every aspect of research. One of the activities we've been looking at has been how do we map our portfolio to look at high risk areas. Frankly, the most fundamental research leads through to discoveries in whole new rafts. Who'd have thought 20 years ago that very fundamental maths would now be the basis for algorithms in AI, which can govern any part of our lives? And actually having that foresight, having the principles of trusted research baked in and the methods in order to protect data, to protect IP, and to control how your research is disseminated are hugely important to the well-being and indeed the prosperity of the UK.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. The idea of maths controlling everything still makes my head hurt. Andy, can I go to you next, please?
Yeah, so I'm Andy Walsh. I'm currently Director for Academic Liaison at GSK, based in well, back in the old days, I was based at the R&D hub in Stevenage. My role there is to be part of a team that is managing the collaboration portfolio that GSK R&D has with academic and particularly government or not-for-profit partners. And our object there really is to collaborate in areas where we can further our R&D efforts towards developing new medicines and vaccines, and to a certain extent consumer health products. And I think we've been one of the reasons why I joined GSK, which is now nearly it's just over 3.5 years ago, was because GSK has a leading position in that was recognised in terms of the number of collaborations we've done, the number of ref case studies that cite GSK's engagement. So, and our collaborations cover a whole raft of areas, but this aspect of trusted research, particularly in the digital space, is a key element of our job. Jennifer talks about the level of due diligence that we do, and that's one of the things that really struck me when I joined GSK from the academic sector, was the level of due diligence that is expected to be done on our partners. And in fact, the challenge that we have is almost the converse of what Jennifer's talking about, which is that we have well-established methods for doing due diligence on commercial partners. And those processes may be appropriate for doing due diligence on small commercial entities in territories that you are unfamiliar with, but they are not necessarily appropriate for dealing with academic institutions that may be hundreds of years old and that we know very well. So actually making sure that the due diligence that we do is appropriate is a big element of our role. But also there is this, because we've got such highly evolved processes in this space, actually there's always a level of education for our academic partners when we are asking questions around data security and the area of trusted research, to actually say why we need the information that we do. So again, I think this is part of building those early stage sort of conversations in a relationship to ensure that collaboration becomes effective downstream. Before I joined GSK, I was on the other side of the fence, and I spent 14 years working at Cambridge in Cambridge Enterprise, commercialising early stage research. So and that leads to my third hat that I have here, which is I'm a board member of Praxis Oral, which is an organisation which represents technology transfer professionals in this space, and supports the whole effort of UK knowledge exchange.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Many hats for most of our panelists. Can I pass to Alex, please?
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Alex Sheks. I'm head of commercialization for UK Research Innovation, working alongside James. And well, I'll get something out of the way quite quickly. In my mind, obviously, UKRI doesn't do commercialization per se, unless we obviously own very specifically some of the output of research generated by our own employees in our kind of institute and centers. But on the whole, UKRI is a funding organization that provide funding for research and innovation. And so my role is really to help understand how best to facilitate that journey from early stage research towards commercialization, where I see commercialization not being an end in itself, but a mean to an end, in that it is sometimes the best way to generate the impact and to make a difference to the people and the community we live in through that journey towards commercialization. So I'm interested in the trusted research agenda, which I think is really, really important to ensure that when we consider the research output, we need to take into account from a very early stage how those might be actually exploited, by who, and for what purpose. And considering not necessarily the primary output and the route to exploitation, but those that might actually be secondary sometimes. So taking into that ethical approach, it's I think, really, really important. And but it's actually a balancing act in mitigating those risks. I've actually Jennifer, James, and Andy already alluded to. So trusted research shouldn't be at the detriment of the exploitation of that research, but it should be really working alongside and understanding the risk associated with it. Because actually we really want that research to make a difference. And in my view, in some cases, it makes that the best difference when exploited commercially and allowing a vast array of people actually accessing the output of that research. And some example of that are very, very current with the access to the current vaccine in response to the pandemic. Those can only happen through commercialization route because of the regulatory hurdles, but also with the costs involved. So I'm here to actually try to understand what some of those issues face and actually highlight the opportunities that one needs to be mindful in managing those different aspects of research as well as the output we want to achieve. So short introduction from me.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, there's some interesting themes that are already coming out from all of you. But I'm going to start with some of the questions and kind of draw those themes in as we go. So one for James to start off with, please. So what are the opportunities to optimize the security and integrity in virtual collaborative research environments, kind of bearing in mind that we've already drawn on the topics of kind of diligence and risk?
So as a natural pessimist, I'm immediately going to flip the question and talk about the risks. Because I think there are significant and different risks in the online collaborative environment. I think the trend we've got at the moment of everyone working remotely, working in this manner, is actually one that's been coming for an awfully long time. The pandemic has accelerated everything, but frankly, the opportunities of cloud computing, of sharing remotely and being able to in an agile fashion, share your data and work on it collaboratively has been on the cards for a long, long time. The pace of change presents significant risks because it means the people doing it aren't necessarily as conversant. They don't necessarily know all of the cyber security issues, and they don't necessarily they're not as up to date with the software as they might be. So in terms of, we all struggle with the various different meeting software that we've got. If you scale that up to a data service and to scaling, it can be a significant risk. So for me, the key opportunities is to around grasping this nettle and ensuring that we get everyone into a common space where they understand what it is that they're doing. And that's every single aspect of the research environment. For me, the biggest, and one of the things they drill into you when you start looking after cybersecurity as a research area, is there are no completely secure systems, and the biggest risk is always the individual using it. And actually, if we can try to move to a point where we think about risks and how we mitigate those, I think that is an opportunity we can take. So every member of a project who has access to the data, understanding how that can be managed, and every single system being looked at to be proportional, yes, but also to be as secure as it can be. I think one of the things I've already seen in the question is the things that are coming up around legal obligations. I think the first thing, one of the things I'd address around this is there are legal obligations of what you must do, otherwise you're acting illegally. For me, that's the start of trusted research. It is not the end of it. I think best practice is absolutely essential because it will set you up as a supplier of choice with your partners. If they know they can trust you with their data, they will come back and they will continue working with you. And I think that is a huge opportunity for everyone, frankly, to get more collaboration ongoing.
On mute. That's a really interesting perspective. Thank you. Panel, would anyone else like to add to that? No? Okay, so I'd now like to move to asking Andy. So as you've worked in academia and industry, what have you learned that would change in your working practice regarding knowledge exchange? You've talked kind of around the due diligence and the collaborative portfolio, but kind of what advice would you give to your previous self in terms of working with industry from the academic side and vice versa, I guess?
I think actually the thing I would probably say to my younger self, and I'm getting on a bit now, is that do not underestimate the pace of change. And so this doesn't really speak to trusted in research in a specific way. But when I was an undergraduate, I remember seeing a seminar by Sidney Brenner about the Human Genome Project and how exciting it was going to be. And it was effectively the late 20th century biological equivalent of the moonshot, and how much effort was going to be required to sequence a single genome, and whether they should do the whole genome or whether we should just do the coding areas and et cetera, et cetera. A great seminar full of gags. About, it would have been somewhere in the order of 10 to 12 years later, I was when I was a postdoc, I actually saw Sidney Brenner talk again just as the human genome was deemed to be complete. And he had used all the same gags, but effectively it was a single model human genome, and we were really chuffed that we were we'd done so well. And now the challenge was how to use it. And now I'm involved in a project where, with a consortium of companies such as J&J, Amgen, and AstraZeneca, with UKRI and Wellcome Trust funding, we are sequencing 450,000 whole genomes of the participants of the UK Biobank, which actually boggles my mind. So I think, I think what we have to do as for those of us that are working in this space is to realise that actually things that we see now as being sort of slightly pie in the sky and may never actually happen are going to happen, and they will happen far faster than we expect. The pace of change is really coming. In terms of of making a shift between that interface between academia and the commercial world, I think in some ways a lot of that, I've always felt that I am basically doing the same job now as I was when I was in academia, and in a way it's the same job I was doing when I was a bench scientist, which is actually trying to use research that will end up benefiting society as a whole. So working in a pharmaceutical company, we are looking at generating new therapies for patients and new vaccines to protect us from disease. And so actually there's a high degree of continuity. And I feel that actually when I work when I did go to the R&D site in Stevenage, it felt superficially like a university. It was still large buildings full of expensive machinery and smart people using them to do research. I think there's a big difference in terms of working in a corporate structure, that particularly one that is involved in making products, and the level of regulation that is involved. And it's particularly true in the pharmaceutical industry, but it would also be true if you were making any other sort of products that are being shipped out there, is that the level of regulation that you have internally is much higher, and you have to adjust to the processes for doing that, which can appear complex. So there's quite a big cultural change that you need to adjust to. Having said that, I think that the object of why we're going into a lot of these collaborations are fairly similar, maybe not identical, but fairly similar to the key scientists that we engage with. So that's remained the same.
Thank you. Yes, I think the pace of change should not be underestimated. It is, as you say, some of the things we come across when we're talking about literal rocket science or, redesigning genomes and things like that, you sit there and you go, hold on a second, are we actually talking about this? But we really are.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes my head hurt, but it definitely makes the world a very interesting place. Would anyone else like to comment on kind of the difference between academia and industry? Yeah, go for it, James.
So I was going to comment on the foresight point, because I think I absolutely agree, and I think some of the pace of change can stagger even the scientists doing the work or the researchers doing the work. And I think it also brings into play the different levels of responsibility that each partner has. Because as a researcher, you will know what your research is doing, what the rough outputs could be, probably requires some imagination to work out what the overall commercialization aspects could be, especially if you're very fundamental, but you have an idea of where it's going. If you start putting that together with other groups who are working with a similar partner, actually it can start making a very different picture. And if you're working on one technology, as I was on a cross-government group who joked that actually when it comes to export control, what happens if you put a gun on top of a tractor, you end up with a tank. And actually, it's when you bring the technologies together that you can see the risk. That is difficult to do at a researcher level, but an institution certainly will be able to see it. And when there are larger collaborations, making sure all partners are talking to each other to understand the different aspects of a technology, I think that is actually something that is a responsibility across the whole collaboration and should be, again, thought of at the earliest stages around how this data is shared around, and to make sure that we don't inadvertently fund something which we don't want to fund.
That's, yes, incredibly interesting when you put it in that way. I'm going to go to Jennifer now, because I think the next question ties in really, really beautifully with this. So the Knowledge Exchange Concordat came out in December, and one of the principles in that Concordat is transparency and ethical use of knowledge exchange and research. So Jennifer, how in your experience can multi-party research be both transparent and ethical? and what are the needs for that kind of diligence around the massive collaborative capability that our sector has.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so I mean, actually, just to expand on what James was just talking about as well, before I look at transparency and ethics in some more detail, there's the flip side of what James just described, which is that my organisation may have accepted this risk to work on this project with this partner, and over here it may have accepted this risk to work on this project with this partner, and that happens all around the institution. At a silo level, you know, every individual project, every individual partnership. Does your institution know what risk it actually is carrying across all of its different research projects? And if it doesn't, I suggest you start having a conversation about it. But to the question, I suppose the question of multi-party research and how it can be transparent and ethical. I guess the first thing is acknowledging actually that there's a possibility that it might not be transparent and ethical. I have so many conversations with researchers along the lines of, do you know what your partner is doing about this? Do you know how they would treat this situation, how they would manage that data? Do you know what ethics standards they work to? And the response is often, well, I couldn't possibly ask them that. You know, I couldn't insult them. I couldn't imply that they might not be transparent. It's surely we take that for a given, and especially when we're dealing with large corporates. The number of times I'll have a response like, "Well, Jenny, they're GSK." Or Jenny, they're you know, whoever they are, I couldn't possibly ask them that question, or I couldn't possibly assume that they might work to a different standard. So I think actually that acknowledgement that different standards will apply in different types of organisation and different parts of the world is the very first step when it comes to transparency and ethics. I'd point, for example, to the Ebola crisis, and so many stories there of researchers turning up in Africa to help, you know, for good reasons, to undertake valid research, but data and samples and all kinds of things kind of leaving the country, and the research organisations, the partners in Africa, not knowing what data exists that from projects they were partners with, where that data is, how they're ever going to access it, and whether they'll ever get any benefit from that data for their research in future. And there are many stories of this, and so in the middle of a pandemic now, it really reminds me of those particular examples. So I think where due diligence comes in, again, it's about those upfront conversations about the ways of working, the standards, the policies, the expectations, and they will be different in different places, and that's fine. It's not necessarily a reason not to work together, but understanding that upfront means that the disparities can be discussed and an approach can be agreed. And then, of course, you can craft collaboration agreements and so on, which mitigate that risk and which kind of bring the transparency alongside just the frank and open discussion between the researchers and the organisations involved.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it's okay to ask. Andy, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I'd back the importance of actually asking the questions early on. And I think as well that it's really important that neither side feels that there's things that they can't bring up in a discussion. Actually, you know, people in industry are, you know, don't have remarkably thin skins, and one question is not going to cause us to flounce out of a potential collaboration. And we will be asking you guys questions about, well, what is the approach to publication? What is the approach to ensuring these results are disseminated appropriately? And the good partners, the partners that you really want to be working with, will actually work to ensure that they are actually aligning with you. And where there are points of potential conflicts, you know, we might actually have to have a discussion about something, and we have to accept that occasionally there may be points where we can't work together or we shouldn't work together, and then move on. But actually, that doesn't mean that that means that you've avoided getting yourself into a difficult situation by acting early, rather than getting into a collaboration and then suddenly finding that, oh my God, I can't publish any of this stuff, or actually the consents for these patients were not correctly collected. I think we're at a phase now where there are both incredible opportunities and risks, and both need to be, we need to manage the risks in order to benefit from the opportunities.
Alex, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think so. Those are very valid points, and I think from a funder point of view, in a UKRI level, those are some of the things that maybe some of our policies or some of our principles aim to highlight. So the importance of engaging early, to have early stage conversation with your partners, to understand the mutual benefits of that collaboration, and highlight at the onset who's going to have access to what result for what purpose. And as a public funder, we will always look to preserve the research integrity of the research, and making sure that results or an outcome of research are disseminated in the most appropriate way. But doesn't mean that when there is potential for commercial exploitation, those results shouldn't be protected, such by patent protection, patent filing if applicable. But that doesn't mean that they cannot then also be disseminated appropriately through either publication of academic research or other means. So, but actually, I will completely echo that. The early engagement you might have, and the more frank conversation you can have on the onset, really help rather than addressing that after a project has started. And in terms of the appetite of risk, that's something that with having access to our data, are incredibly able to do, is to monitor across the different portfolio that we have, the risk associated with those, not only at an institution level, but across institution and with one maybe single industry partner, because we have access to that data.
Thank you. James.
Everyone else had said something, so I thought I should. So the other aspect I thought I'd also touch on is legal collaborations are great, and absolutely you have to have them, but make sure you're also always thinking about this throughout the whole lifetime of the research. One of the main things that I worry about within my own portfolio is frankly carelessness. Because not only just, especially in this online environment where you share slides automatically, if someone presses print screen, they can get exactly what's on there. If you don't think very carefully about what you're sharing, you could give away a lot of secrets. And first of all, that might violate the collaboration agreement you have signed with your partners, which in itself may destroy that collaboration, but it also may allow others to take the knowledge that you have created and use it for other means outside of your control. And I think therefore it's the constant awareness around the entire community that this is an issue, but they need to think about this seriously and in a slightly different way now we're online. It's, the habit of just saying, oh, it's on the Teams site, it's all right, here's the login, quickly go and have a look. But which bits are protected and which not? And making sure the user are very, very upskilled and know all of this stuff is essential to making sure it's an ongoing safeguarding process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of life cycle management of information really is critical. So in terms of these relationships that we've been kind of discussing and how they've changed, I'm going to open this up to everyone, but Jennifer and Alex, maybe you want to comment first. What's changed during the pandemic? So you've mentioned screen grabs of slides, or I've heard of, Teams channels where you've not checked whether it's internal or external or a mixture. Kind of what do we need to be more aware of? And also what's really important that we keep, or that we maybe think twice about, because everyone's kind of reached for technology because that's been our only option. But have we done the risk and the diligence around which technologies we're using, when, and most importantly, why? Alex, can I come to you first on that one, please?
So I think from a research environment, the pandemic and have affected many aspects. I mean, one, I think, which is one to celebrate, is how researchers, university, KE professionals have actually raised to the challenge in actually addressing and being able to address the pandemic. And that is best exemplified by the development of the tools, technologies, and vaccine currently available in less than a year. I mean, that is phenomenal. And that is down to the really hard work and the existing capability that there was in the system. But it also created lots of pressure. So are we going to go back to our previous normal ways? Probably not. But what has the pandemic and how researchers, KE professionals, and universities have addressed the pandemic might then do to the future. And are we creating a new normal, which is my worry. So we know that KE professionals and universities have been very good in making results available at speed, at an instrumentary speed. Is that now the expectation? And I think we need to be very careful about that. On the personal level, what I know is that, well, I haven't been in the office for a year, and actually realized that the limiting factor in the amount of meeting I could have was the availability of physical space and meeting rooms. That's no longer the case. So the way we engage is drastically changing, and how we engage and how do we sustain our contacts and networks is going to be really important. So how do we able to have those frank conversations when we're not necessarily meeting face to face is also going to be really important to consider. How do you trust somebody at the end of a screen as opposed to when you can see in the eyes? I think is a personal aspect of collaboration that might be more suitable to others than others. So that's a bit of a joke aside, but also we've therefore exchanged information on using more digital platform, and I think the question around which digital platform should you trust and should you use is a very interesting one. But the fact that you need to make sure that you understand the legal agreements and framework actually surrounding those platforms is extremely crucial as well. And which jurisdiction actually are you signing up to, which might be very different from the UK as well.
Thank you. Jennifer or anybody else, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make some similar points, so I won't repeat them all. But I think in particular, the pace of change and the pace at which things have happened during the pandemic, it obviously is fantastic. But I am concerned about the precedent that it sets and what that means for governance and management of risk. If there is an expectation that the sector and that KE professionals, researchers, regulatory bodies, everybody else involved continues to be able to operate at the rate we've operated in the last year, if it's a case of, well, you've done it once, so now surely you can do it all the time, there's significant risk involved in that. You know, you can take these risks once, twice, three times in an emergency situation. You can acknowledge where you want to perhaps relax certain elements of governance and decision making for things that need a really quick response. But if that becomes the norm, then either we're building in a whole new level of risk across the sector, which I don't think anyone wants to do, or we need to really step up those governance and due diligence processes around what we're doing, and probably the regulation that goes with it, which is a bit worrying in itself. In order to kind of support that quicker way of working. So that would be my main concern about the pandemic in this space. On the flip side, something positive, I think, in terms of effectively managing collaboration has been just how much easier it is to jump onto a Teams call and speak to a collaborator wherever they are in the world or whatever organisation they're in. And I think we really see the benefit to that, to the nature of the relationships and the partnerships and the collaborations. You know, that if they can operate at that more personal knowledge level, acknowledging that there's a question of how much you trust somebody in person versus over the screen, but you know, you can build that more immediately accessible personal relationship, then I think that's only got to be good for a collaboration as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. So I'm going to go to the Q&A from the chat. There's been a question around the framing of shared agreements in relation to the TRE Green Paper. Victoria, can I come to you on this one, please?
Okay. Yeah, I've answered some of these in the question and answer. So yeah, these are really interesting developments. So Tim is working with Health Data Research UK, which is a really interesting consortium looking at the health data usage in terms of you know, developing up social and economic and epidemiological science. Tim, if you want to come off mute and just talk a little bit about the TRE Green Paper, just for briefly, that would be really good. Just talk about the principles very briefly, if you could. Are you still here with us? I'm not sure he's still here. Yeah, but we've answered that one, Caitlin. I think for me, one of the questions that's come up is from Hannah. So does the current thinking about responsible research go far enough for trusted research, going on how EPSRC UK define it? Is it enough to ask researchers to just think, or do we need to be pushing this further? So panelists, what are your thoughts on that question from Hannah?
Would you like me to take that first? And hello, Hannah. As she used to work at EPSRC, I think it's reasonable that we answer her question. So for me, when I first came to trusted research, I thought about it in very similar ways to responsible innovation. And it is around the foresight of what can be done with the research and where it's going, and taking an ethical and responsible standpoint to keeping control of that and making sure it's for the public good. I think as we've gone on, actually, there is a very specific legal definition around trusted research. We've been working with the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure, which is part of GCHQ and MI5, around what those definitions are. I think there are specific legal obligations. So I think it's part of absolutely the same picture, but there are very specific legal things that you must meet within it. In terms of the how do we make sure the whole system works, and is it just enough to ask researchers to think about? From my perspective, I think we need to be able to show, as the UK, that universities are taking this very seriously, that there is sufficient due diligence in place, that UKRI investment and indeed the research innovation that goes on in those universities has enough that we have confidence that trusted research is not being breached, that the research is still for the public good. I think if that wasn't the case, then we might move to a situation where the government would have more appetite to legislate against aspects of it, to take some control around it. From our own perspective, we very much want to continue enabling research. We want people to be able to do this. Trusted research, from my perspective, is a very good way of promoting those collaborations, and therefore having a whole sector speak with one voice that yes, we do take this seriously and we do X, Y, and Z on the due diligence. I think it will be very important, especially in the new working environment.
Thanks, James. We can just jump to Tim Hubbard, who's just going to talk about the TRE Green Paper. Tim, over to you. Can you unmute yourself, please? And if you want to go on camera, that's great too.
I don't think I can do.
No worries.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so the TRE Green Paper, this is coming out of Health Data Research UK, particularly linked to the Health Data Research Alliance, which brings a whole load of players with health data, you know, ranging from Genomics England with the 100K data set to NHS Digital, are building a trusted research environment. So the basic principle is get away from distributing data to anybody, individual level data, because the public doesn't trust anonymization. And we want to expand. This isn't for cohorts where people have agreed to share their data. This is for the health system. If you want to do analysis across health systems, you really need buy-in from patients and public. And operating it like this, you know, we're doing a engagement session tonight, but there've been quite a lot of them. The public and patients are much more comfortable if the data never gets distributed. The question then is, can you provide an environment that allows you to do research inside basically a locked environment where you can only take out summary results and not individual level data. We've been doing that with Genomics England for 20 petabytes of data. There's quite a lot of experience in social science before, but with smaller data sets operating a similar model. So this is potentially a future way of doing things that's compatible with cloud, with security managed on your behalf. So you as a participant don't have to worry about cybersecurity because it's being done for you.
Thank you, Tim. Could you pop the link to your launch event if it's open in the chat, and also the link to the paper if it's available? That's great.
Yeah, I put a link to the paper in the chat.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Andy, can I jump to you next, please?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Tim was saying, that actually that is a structure that we have used in existing collaborations, such as things that we've got going on in Finland. And I think from an industry perspective, I mean, I'll take a step back, because I think actually the area that Tim has talked about is one of those which has possibly one of the groups from the pharmaceutical space is one of the greatest opportunities, is that we can now collate huge data sets where we've got fundamental data from humans, whether that goes all the way down to genetic data, but also all of their health data to give us a real understanding about how their genetics impacts on their health. And that's really important, because actually, historically, we've relied hugely on doing model systems and animal studies and stuff like that. And one of the things I've said for many years is that we don't need to cure another mouse of Parkinson's disease. We actually want to cure people, and drugs and targets that have got some sort of link to human genetic data have a far greater chance of being successfully translated into new therapies for patients. And so there's an absolute paradigm shift towards working with real life patients and the data that pertains to them. And then that comes with the risks, and this is exactly what Tim is talking about. But actually, this is people's most intimate personal information, what their health is, what their genetics are. And I think we can all understand as individuals, you don't want that data being distributed widely. You want research that's being done on that to have high levels of integrity and transparency. And so, and from a commercial perspective, often we won't want the risk of being granted access to human individual identifiable information, because actually that's, it is stuff where you can make mistakes, you can have individuals that are being complacent. And so actually handling that is a risk. So the development of these sort of safe haven type environments that allow us to do this really powerful, vital research, yet in a way that is of low risk, is something that from the industry perspective we fully support and use.
If I may jump in, yeah, absolutely, Andy. With the UK Data Service, we've been operating a secure lab for a number of years, and the 5 Safes framework is possibly one of the most industry gold standard approaches that's been developed. The issue is you can never fully do that, but what we do is we have trusted researchers, trusted projects, and then the outputs are monitored to make sure they're not disclosive. It's quite labour intensive. The more that you get big data, stream data, there's going to be a bigger overhead on this. So it's really how we kind of customise those approaches to make them work on a scale, on an industrial scale. And I think that's something that we're really concerned about, just and focusing on in that infrastructure piece. And it does need a collective think, because these tramways were, as you say, and as Tim said, developed for smaller data, for data that had a high degree of complexity, a high degree of rigour and a high degree of investment. So how do we apply these approaches? It's a question I'd like really to carry on the conversation about if we could.
There's lots of conversations that could continue from this. There's certainly a breadth of topics. Go on then, James.
So just to follow up, because actually hearing from HDR UK, who we part fund, has triggered a neuron, and following on from Hannah's question. So I think there is a lot of space that isn't covered yet. And by that, I mean, we fund large investments that look at how one protects data in certain spaces. And there are ethical frameworks, and if you ever do anything with the Medical Research Council, you would know the length of the forms you have to go through for anything to talk around biological samples. Those frameworks are great for the things they cover. There are huge swathes of the research community where there aren't those frameworks in place yet, nor frankly is there the policy to keep the same pace as the research that's been going on. So I think it's incumbent on all researchers, given the pace of change, to be really thinking about how this would operate within their research area and how that's going to then scale outside of it. Because I think that's where the biggest risks are. The frameworks, we've got methods of dealing with this, and we're thinking about it, and we've been thinking about it for decades. The other areas which are behind are, I think, the areas where the emergent risks will come. And those are going to be both to the actual sanctity and quality of the research, but also massive reputational risk to the university and the researchers themselves. Never underestimate how bad a newspaper headline is for your continuing ability to collaborate with people, just because the output of your research from 10 years ago has been used for something completely different. I think that's a massive aspect which often isn't thought about because we focus on the legal as much as possible.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. This is going to be the last question today, but we will make sure that any questions that don't have a response are responded to. So please do keep them coming. So I'm going to go to Chris's question. So he says, to what extent does James's point about carelessness in revealing sensitive information and data link to the topic of intentional open science and scholarship when working with commercial partners? So I think James, kind of jumping back a bit, but I think James was talking about kind of screen grabs and accidental sharing of data. Whereas we know in kind of the fair research policies and open access that we're looking at replicable data that can be repeated in the future. James, if you could keep your answer to a couple of minutes for me so we can wrap up on time, that would be great.
I will try not to strain. So from what I think that question is, it is an interesting dilemma, because we absolutely, everything we fund to the Research Council part of UKRI, we expect to be published, and we absolutely welcome open access and people to have access to information. However, I think it is also incumbent to do that in the right way. And the key thing here is how that information is going out, making sure that anything that could cause significant harm is thought about, and if necessary, is mitigated prior to that going out. And I think for me, this is about control. This is about making sure researchers can continue to benefit from the work that they do, continue to publish and get that information out, yes, but also to control it in such a way that it's a benefit to them and to the UK.
Absolutely, that's great, thank you. So before I hand over to Victoria to wrap up, I just want to say thank you to all our panelists and to everyone on the call today. We are looking at data safe havens and how we can best support members and industry in that collaboration within the research world. So if there's something you're working on at the moment that you think that you need help or support with, or you think that Jisc can offer advice and guidance, please do get in touch, because I really would like to hear about your use cases so we can support you better in the future. So thank you very much from me, and I'll just hand back to Victoria.
Thanks, Caitlin. I think this has been absolutely totally important for our deliberations. We know that the issues of due diligence need to apply across the piece. We know that the issue of acceleration needs to make sure that it doesn't undermine research integrity. And we know that there's a need to industrialise our approaches. So as Caitlin said, we're looking at trusted research environments in the future. I don't think we can really guarantee data safe havens, but we will hope to continue this conversation. And I'd like to arrange another webinar in the very near future to carry it on, if that would be great. So thanks everyone, thanks to our excellent speakers, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you, bye-bye.
George, could you stop the recording, please?